Yartzeit. Good evening, everybody. Today is the 11th day of Iyar, which is a Yartzeit of, I would say, a not so well known tzaddik from America. Sometimes he's called America's first Talmud Chacham, because really before him there were people who were a little bit Yodea Sefer, and they were Shochtim and Moilim and Chazonim, and they could open a Gemara, make a Leining, a Shulchan Aruch, but they didn't really learn in yeshiva in a traditional sense. Many of them would ceremonially use the title rabbi, even though they weren't officially ordained as rabbis, and he was actually in that category as well. His technical title might be reverend, as was his perhaps a little bit more famous father-in-law, Gershon Mendel Sheshes. But today's the Yartzeit of Baer Kursheedt, who was the Chazan, the religious leader of the Jewish community in Richmond, Virginia for 11 years, and later took over his father-in-law's post in New York City. The famous Patriot rabbi Gershon Mendel Sheshes was his father-in-law. Baer has a very interesting story. He was a Talmud of Reb Nosson Adler. Reb Nosson Adler was famous for being the Rebbe of the Chassam Sofer. So it's a tremendous yichus. So can you imagine someone who was a student of the Chassam Sofer's Rebbe, and also Reb Nosson Adler was a gadol in his own right, but that he came here to America so early in the early 1800s. Reb Nosson Adler said about Reb Baer that he was a chacham, that he was a sage, he was a wise man, and he was a tremendous Talmud chacham and unique in America in that time in history. He came as a bacher, and his plans were to go into business in America. The story goes he first settled in Boston and found there was only one Jew there, and he didn't keep kosher, so he moved to New York. Coming to New York, the Chazan there, Reb Gershon Mendel Sheshes, a very famous patriot in American history, one of the founders actually of Columbia University, and he was George Washington's rabbi. He was there at George Washington's inauguration and spoke, representing the Jewish community. When he had many children, Gershom, and one of his daughters married this Rabbi Baer. And shortly thereafter, Rabbi Baer figured, he wanted to go into business. And at the time, if you can imagine such a thing, I was a Rav in Richmond, Virginia for a number of years. That's part of the reason why I'm so interested in this particular figure. But he moved to Richmond, Virginia. Why? Because at the time, Richmond had a larger Jewish community than New York did. And he didn't plan to fill any rabbinical role there, just to go into business. But seeing him there at the Kahal Kadosh Beth Shalom, which was the 6th Jewish congregation in America, and the furthest west at the time of its founding. We don't really consider Richmond to be a western city, but it's one of the few early cities there that wasn't a coastal city. And so Rabbi Kursheedt became the Chazan, the religious leader. Doesn't mean just he was the cantor. He was basically the rabbi of Richmond, Virginia. And he was there for 11 years. There are many interesting stories. He was very friendly with Thomas Jefferson. This was, of course, after his presidency. And he would visit him in Monticello often, and they would talk about comparative religion and different things. And Rabbi Baer The interesting story was that when he came to Richmond, it was during the War of 1812. Now, he and his wife traveled on a coach, I guess a stagecoach or a wagon with horses, and he had a very valuable library of Sfarim, of Judaic literature, which was probably one of a kind in the New World. Much different than anything that his father-in-law had. A wide variety of Sfarim, and he sent those on a ship. The ship was captured by the British. It was the War of 1812, and he assumed they'd be lost. The ship actually wound up somewhere in the Bahamas, and eventually all the Sfarim were returned to Baer. And the interesting story goes that he said he didn't know if it was his fellow Jew or if it was his brother Mason who returned the Sfarim to him. Apparently he was a Freemason, and he had the Sfarim in a with stamps with Masonic symbols on them. So it was very interesting. When his father-in-law was Nifter, he moved back to New York and became the Chazan there, the religious leader, basically the chief rabbi of the Jewish community in New York. He started the first Ashkenazic synagogue, which was the second synagogue in the city. Sheretz Israel was the first one, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. That was where he was officially the Chazan. And he's buried, he died in 1856, I believe. And he is buried in Queens, right by the Interborough Parkway, in the Sheretz Israel Cemetery. So it's I visited there a number of times, and it's a very interesting place to visit, because we think of, there were tzaddikim who died later than that people go and make pilgrimages to their graves in Europe. And here we have, in New York City, a grave right by the Jackie Robinson Parkway. Not the same cemetery where the Rav Koilel and Rav Pam and Reb Yankov are buried, but a little bit before that, on the Queens side. All right. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. We'll see you later.